Have you ever noticed how the quietest woman in the room somehow leaves the loudest echo in a man's soul? She doesn't chase. She doesn't argue. She doesn't need to correct his misunderstandings. And yet he keeps returning to her in thought, circling her memory like a moth circling the same flame that will eventually consume it. There's something about her stillness that unravels him. Something about her calm, her completeness, her quiet confidence that exposes the storm within him. Not because she hides something, but because she doesn't need to. She's whole, untouchable, and in that wholeness, she becomes unforgettable. This isn't a game, it's gravity. She carries the kind of presence Carl Jung once called an archetype, living embodiment of the feminine mystery. The anima, not as a mask, but as a living myth breathing through her. She no longer moves from the need to be liked, wanted, or saved. She has gone deeper into the dark waters of her own unconscious, where she met the wounded girl she once was. Not to silence her, but to honor her. Some women wake up one morning and simply decide, no more softening themselves just to feel safe. No more bleeding to belong. No more shrinking to be loved. And when she reaches that threshold, she no longer explains her silence. She lets it speak. She no longer answers the wrong questions. She lets mystery become her language. Because real power sovereignty is not about being seen. It's about choosing when to be visible, and that's what traps him. The modern man, raised on validation. On women performing affection just to be chosen, doesn't know what to do with a woman who needs nothing from him. He expects a mirror, a reflection of his ego, someone to reward his presence, to soothe his insecurity. But she isn't a mirror, she's a lens. And through her, he sees himself unfiltered. She doesn't flatter his armor. She looks straight through it. And in that gaze, he feels something terrifying to be seen. Not as the version he curates for the world, but as the boy beneath the bravado, the hunger beneath the humor, the fear beneath the arrogance. She sees it, and she doesn't move to fix it. That restraint, that grace, drives him mad. Because he can't earn her. He can't solve her. He can't own what he can't predict. And for a man who built his identity on conquest, that is a prison. He replays conversations. He wonders what she meant. He feels her absence like a haunting. Her silence becomes louder than any voice he's ever known. But the truth Ish was never playing hard to get. She was simply hard to forget. You see, Jung once said that every man carries within him the animated inner feminine, soft, intuitive, creative force that completes his psyche. But when that part of him is unintegrated, he doesn't meet a woman as a compliment. He meets her as a craving. And when that craving goes unmet, he mistakes her wholeness for rejection. But her refusal isn't punishment, it's liberation. She spent years being told that her value was in how much she gave, how fast she forgave, how easily she could be read. She lived in rooms where empathy was mistaken for obligation. But now she no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses. She doesn't explain why she leaves the table, she just leaves when the conversation dishonors her silence. She's not mysterious because she hides. She's mysterious because she no longer performs, and so he becomes a prisoner not of her body, but of his own unhealed mind, haunted by the realization that something eternal brushed past Hyman. He wasn't ready to meet it. She never begged for his loyalty, never needed his promises. Her stillness made him question his storms. Her grace exposed the gracelessness in his pursuit. That's what shattered him, not her absence. But what her absence revealed. Because when a woman steps out of archetypation, she stops being the caretaker. The muse, the healer, and becomes her own oracle. She channels the divine feminine not to please the masculine, but to balance it. She doesn't apologize for her depth. She lives in it, and he, unknowingly, becomes a pilgrim to her presence. What most men don't understand is that women like her aren't born mysterious, they're forged. Forged in heartbreak and silence and the exhaustion of being misunderstood. She was once the girl who overshared just to feel seen, who overgave just to feel loved, who apologized for taking up space. But she grew tired of explaining her softness to people who turned it into a weakness. So She learned. She learned that transparency isn't always safety. That vulnerability in the wrong hands is self-betrayal. She stopped performing openness for people who only wanted access, not understanding now. She wears her mystery like a second skin as armor, but as essence. She no longer flinches when misunderstood. She no longer explains when misjudged. Because she's met herself in the darkened. She didn't run Dot, and that kind of woman doesn't fear losing a man who only saw her in the light. For him, though, the story doesn't end. He remembers her in fragments, her laugh like a riddle, her silence like scripture, her gaze like a prophecy he never learned to read. He scrolls through memories searching for meaning, not realizing the meaning was always himself. The feminine mystery was never meant to confuse him. It was meant to evolve him. But evolution requires surrendering. Most men are too afraid to let go. So they retreat. They label her too much, too distant, too complicated. Because it's easier to judge the mystery than to face the mirror it holds up Dot, and still she doesn't react. Because her silence isn't passive eight's power, she doesn't need revenge. She doesn't need validation. She doesn't need to be understood by those who don't understand themselves. She just keeps choosing herself again, and again until the world adjusts its gaze. He remembers her in quiet moments, long drive home. The pause between texts, the breath before sleep. That's when she returns it in body, but in presence. A phantom stitched into his heartbeat. A reminder of what was sacred, and what he wasn't ready to hold. Because that's the power of a mysterious woman. She doesn't leave footprints. She leaves imprints. She didn't vanish to punish him. She withdrew to protect her peace, to preserve the sanctity of her soul. Her absence was not rejection, it was revelation. It showed him what access looks like when it must be earned, not given. Now, she blooms quietly. She heals in private. She celebrates without broadcast. The girl who once wanted to be everything to someone has become the woman who would rather be everything to herself. And that evolution terrifies men who only know how to love through possession. So they chasten at her but the reflection of who they were when they stood beside her light. But she doesn't chase. She doesn't wait. She chooses, always chooses. Because the woman who has met herself no longer negotiates her worth. She no longer seeks closure from others as her own closure. Her silence is her rebellion, her peace is her victory, and her sovereignty is her crown. He'll meet others louder, easier, more compliant. But none will haunt him. Because she was never meant to be conquered. She was meant to awaken. She doesn't leave men. She leaves illusions, and when she walks away, it's not an ending. It's initiation. Because when a woman becomes a mystery, she stops being a chapter in a man's story. She becomes the whole book, the myth, the mirror, the flame. And he, forever turning the pages, finally learned some echoes are not meant to fade.